On a crisp September morning, when the world seemed to hold its breath in the quiet before a storm, an unthinkable tragedy shattered the calm of Croydon. In that delicate balance between light and shadow, a promise of hope was eclipsed by darkness, a darkness that would leave a community in mourning and a nation questioning the very nature of fate. Eliane Andam was more than just a bright smile in a sea of hope. She was an embodiment of dreams and aspirations, a young soul destined for greatness. Yet beneath this radiant exterior, fate was silently weaving a tale of heartbreak and mystery. On that fateful morning, an altercation over something as seemingly trivial as a lost teddy bear escalated into a confrontation that would forever alter the course of lives. What started as a dispute among friends spiraled into an act of violence that defied belief, raising the question, was this the heat of a moment's passion, or was there a premeditated darkness at work? And then there's Hassan Sentamu, the enigmatic figure at the center of it all. Who is the troubled soul behind the chilling act? Was he merely a pawn in a cascade of impulsive decisions, or did a deeper, more calculated plan lie behind his every move? In the moments that follow, we invite you to embark on a journey into the heart of a mystery that defies easy answers. Unseen evidence, expert insights, and the raw testimonies of those whose lives were forever altered. All converge to unravel the truth behind a day that began with hope and ended in unspeakable loss. This is the story of Eliane Andam, a tale of light clashing with darkness, of innocence betrayed by unforeseen fate. As we peel back the layers of this case, prepare to question everything you thought you knew about passion, justice, and the unpredictable currents that shape our lives. Before tragedy rewrote her story, Eliane Andam was a girl with dreams, big ones, dreams of justice, dreams of standing in a courtroom, defending the innocent, and speaking for those who had no voice. At just 15, she already carried an unwavering sense of purpose, her future bright with ambition. She wasn't just a student, she was a daughter, a friend, a young woman who saw the world not just as it was, but as it could be. She spoke often of becoming a lawyer, of fighting for the underprivileged. She was captivated by the power of words, the weight of justice. Teachers remember her as determined, intelligent, a young woman who carried herself with grace beyond her years. But even as she envisioned a future in law, she had no way of knowing that the law would soon be used to piece together the tragedy of her own story. How does a girl with so much promise become the center of a crime scene? What happens in the gap between innocence and violence? To understand, we must go deeper. We must examine the forces that moved in the background, forces that would lead two paths to a single moment of irreversible consequence. Then, there was him, Hassan Sentamu. A name that would soon be whispered in horror, a face that would become synonymous with an unthinkable act. But before that day, before the headlines in the courtroom, who was he? To some, he was a quiet boy. To others, a shadow waiting for the right moment to fall. Friends recall his mood swings, charming one moment, volatile the next. A boy who knew how to blend in, yet never seemed to belong. A boy with a past that hinted at something brewing beneath the surface. There were warning signs, whispers of aggression, incidents that in hindsight read like red flags waving in the wind, ignored until it was too late. Reports of fights, a fascination with weapons, a short temper that ignited like a spark in dry grass. And then there was the relationship, the one that would set everything into motion. Croydon, a town of contrasts, a place where life moves fast, where ambition thrives, but where danger lurks in the spaces between. A town where young dreams are often challenged by a harsher reality. A rising tide of youth violence that too often goes unchecked. Knife crime in London has been rising, but Croydon has been a hotspot, a place where statistics turn into names and names turn into stories of loss. Youth violence has seeped into schoolyards, onto buses, into the very fabric of everyday life. And yet no one ever thinks it will happen to someone they love until it does. And so, on an ordinary morning, in an ordinary place, two lives on separate paths collided in a moment that could never be undone. The days leading up to the crime were filled with tension, Tension that neither Eliane nor those around her fully understood. A breakup, a grudge, a confrontation that simmered beneath the surface, waiting for the moment to erupt. The argument had started over something small, a memento from a relationship, something sentimental, something that should have meant nothing more than a reminder of what once was. But for Hassan Sentamu, it became a symbol of something else, of control, of power. And when Eliane stood up for her friend, she unknowingly stepped into the eye of a storm. What truly happened in those final moments? Was it a crime of impulse? Or had this been building all along, a tragedy waiting for its moment to unfold? The truth lies in the details, and the details will unravel everything. It was a Wednesday, an ordinary morning, the kind where the world feels like it's moving on autopilot. But for Eliane Andam, this day was not ordinary. This was the day her life would be cut short. And for Hassan Sentamu, it was the day he would cross the line from troubled teenager to convicted killer. They say you never know when a moment will change your life forever. But what if? What if this wasn't just a moment? What if this had been set in motion long before? It was here at this bus stop that their paths converged. Eliane, a girl standing up for her friend. Hassan, a boy who had made up his mind. Witnesses would later recall that the air felt charged with something unspoken, as if the city itself had paused, bracing for what was about to unfold. It started with words, accusations, a confrontation fueled by resentment. Eliane had stepped in to defend her friend, a girl Hassan had once dated. But this wasn't just about a breakup. This was about power, control, and in that moment, Hassan was losing both. There are moments in life where time slows, where a single decision determines everything. And then, there are moments where time snaps forward, irreversible, unforgiving. What happened next lasted mere seconds, but it would haunt those who witnessed it for a lifetime. In one swift motion, the blade was out. The distance between them vanished. Before anyone could scream, before she could even react, Hassan struck. Eyewitnesses would later describe the attack as sudden, merciless, like something out of a nightmare. They saw the blade move again and again. Eliane staggered back, a hand to her neck, eyes wide, not in fear but in disbelief. A girl who had fought for her future, now watching it slip away between her fingers. And then, silence. The kind of silence that presses against your chest, that makes the air feel heavier. In that silence, Eliane crumpled to the ground. A teacher who happened to be passing by rushed to her side, pressing against the wound, whispering, "Stay with me, Eliane. Help is coming." But even as he spoke the words, the truth hung thick in the air. The damage had already been done. The 999 call came in at 8:30 a.m. Within minutes, emergency responders were there. But minutes weren't enough. Time had already made its decision. Eliane was rushed to the hospital, but there was no miracle waiting for her there. No last-minute rescue. At 9:21 a.m., she was pronounced dead. A life extinguished before it had even begun. The city of London had just awakened, but now it stood still. Word spread like wildfire. A 15-year-old girl gone, a boy vanished, a murder in broad daylight. And as the streets buzzed with whispers of the horror that had just unfolded, one question remained. Where was Hassan Sentamu? Hassan had fled, but he hadn't disappeared, and the truth, like blood on pavement, was impossible to wash away. By 8:45 a.m., the crime scene was already swarming with officers. The pavement, once just another stop along a busy morning, had become something else entirely. Evidence. Blood stained the concrete. A school backpack lay abandoned, its straps twisted, as if someone had dropped it in a hurry. Nearby, a single discarded knife glinted in the light, a weapon that had ended a life in seconds. The scene was chaotic. Eyewitnesses were still trembling, their voices breaking as they tried to recount what they had seen. Some were unable to speak at all. Others, like a schoolmate of Eliane, sobbed through their words. It happened so fast. 1 second she was there, the next, she was on the ground. We couldn't stop it. The first responders did everything they could, but it was clear Eliane hadn't stood a chance. And now it was up to forensic science to fill in the gaps, to turn this tragedy into evidence, and to track down the boy who had disappeared into the city's veins. Every crime scene tells a story. Every drop of blood, every fingerprint, every fiber, it all holds meaning. And as the forensic team combed through the evidence, they were piecing together the final moments of Eliane's life. The autopsy would reveal the brutal truth of what happened in those final moments. Eliane had been stabbed in the neck, a wound so precise and devastating that it left almost no time for survival. The blade had severed vital arteries, an attack meant to kill. Not an accident, not a moment of rage, a deliberate, targeted act of violence. The forensic analysis confirmed what the witnesses already knew. This was not just an argument gone wrong. This was an execution. But while Eliane's body lay still on a hospital bed, the boy who had put her there was running. Hassan Sentamu had fled, but he wasn't invisible, and he wasn't invincible. The manhunt had begun. By midday, Hassan's face was on every officer's phone. His name was in every briefing room. Detectives scoured CCTV footage, tracking his movement through Croydon, watching as he ducked into alleyways, changed direction, doubled back. But for all his efforts, he was still just a 17-year-old boy, panicked, reckless, and making mistakes. At 2:30 p.m., less than 6 hours after the murder, police received a tip, a location, a house where he might be hiding. They moved fast, no hesitation, no second chances. He was found in a relative's house, hiding in a bedroom, the same knife still in his possession. He didn't resist. He didn't fight. He simply looked up at the officers and let them take him away. As they drove him away, he barely spoke. No anger, no remorse, just silence. But that silence wouldn't last long. When the interrogation began, Hassan did what most criminals do. He lied. He claimed it was self-defense, that Eliane had provoked him, that he hadn't meant to hurt her. But the evidence told a different story. The knife had been brought to the scene. The attack had been swift, targeted. This wasn't self-defense. This was murder. As the hours dragged on, the weight of the evidence pressed against him like a slow-moving tide. The CCTV footage, the forensic analysis, the witness statements. Piece by piece, the truth cornered him like he had cornered Eliane. And finally, he broke. Hassan Sentamu confessed, but by then his words meant nothing. Eliane was still gone, and no amount of remorse could bring her back. With the confession secured, the case moved forward. But in the UK, juvenile crime is handled differently. At 17, Hassan was not considered a fully fledged adult under the law. But was he still a child? Could a boy who planned a murder, who carried a knife with intent, be given the same protections as someone who didn't understand their actions? The law in cases like these is complex. But one thing was clear: Eliane's family wanted justice, and the world was watching. On the morning of Hassan Sentamu's trial, the courtroom was silent, not out of respect, but out of anticipation. The weight of justice loomed over every seat, every bench, every whispered conversation. The prosecution was ready. The defense was prepared. And Eliane's family sat quietly, waiting for the moment they could finally hear the words, "Guilty as charged." This trial was not just about one crime. It was about what justice meant in a world where children could kill other children. Was Hassan a cold-blooded murderer, or was he a troubled teenager, incapable of controlling his actions? This was the battle that would unfold in the coming weeks. The prosecution wasted no time. Their case was simple, clear, and brutal. Hassan Sentamu had murdered Eliane Andam in cold blood. He had brought a knife to the scene. He had waited for her. And when the moment came, he had attacked without hesitation, without mercy. This was premeditation, the prosecution argued. Not a moment of madness, not a sudden loss of control. The footage, the witness testimony, the forensic evidence, it all told the same story. Hassan had made a decision, and Eliane had paid the price. Then there was the knife. The prosecution showed the jury the very weapon Hassan had used, a common kitchen knife, simple, unremarkable, until it became an instrument of death. This wasn't self-defense, the lead prosecutor argued. This was an execution. Then came the counter-argument. Hassan was not a cold-blooded killer, the defense insisted. He was a boy, barely more than a child, who had struggled his whole life with emotional regulation, with impulse control, with understanding the world around him. And they had one word to explain it all: autism. Hassan had been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder at a young age. He struggled with social cues, with emotional expression, with processing conflict. His defense team argued that, in his mind, the situation with Eliane had escalated beyond his control. He hadn't planned to kill her, they claimed. He had reacted, a tragic, irreversible reaction, but a reaction nonetheless. But was this an excuse? The prosecution argued number. Hassan had functioned well enough to bring a knife. He had understood consequences well enough to run after the crime. He had stayed hidden, tried to evade arrest. These were not the actions of someone who didn't understand right from wrong. These were the actions of someone who didn't want to get caught. The question was simple. Did his autism make him incapable of criminal intent? Or was it a desperate attempt to avoid a life sentence? Then the moment everyone had been waiting for, the impact statements. For weeks, the trial had focused on Hassan, his actions, his mind, his defense. But now it was time to hear from the ones left behind. "She was my baby," her mother whispered, "my only daughter. She wanted to be a lawyer. She wanted to help people. And now she's gone. Because of him." The courtroom was silent, except for the quiet sobs echoing against the high ceilings. Even Hassan, who had barely reacted throughout the trial, kept his eyes fixed on the table, his hands clenched into fists. After days of testimony, hours of deliberation, and endless arguments, the verdict was in. The judge cleared his throat. The entire room held its breath. On the charge of murder, we find the defendant guilty. It was over. Hassan Sentamu, at just 17 years old, was convicted of murder. But what came next would shape his fate forever. The law in the UK is clear. Juveniles convicted of murder face mandatory life sentences. But the length of that sentence is at the judge's discretion, and in this case, the judge was firm. Hassan was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 16 years. He would be eligible for parole, but not until he was well into his 30s. For Eliane's family, it wasn't enough. For some, it was too much. But the law had spoken. As Hassan was led away, the finality of his actions settled in. A single choice had destroyed two lives. Eliane's, stolen far too soon, and his own, wasted before it had even begun. Eliane Andam's murder didn't just break a family, it broke a community. In the days following her death, an entire city mourned. Strangers wept for a girl they had never met. And across the UK, one question echoed in every household, every school, every courtroom. How could this happen? The tragedy sent shockwaves across the nation. News stations ran 24-hour coverage, dissecting every detail. Social media erupted with debates. Some saw Hassan as a monster, others as a lost boy failed by the system. But in the center of all the noise, one voice stood apart, the voice of Eliane's grieving family, turning pain into purpose. Eliane's mother refused to let her daughter's death become just another statistic. Within weeks, she stood before crowds, before Parliament, before the very institutions that had allowed youth violence to spiral out of control. "We can't keep burying our children," she told the nation. "Something has to change." And so, the fight began. A petition calling for harsher penalties on knife crime gathered thousands of signatures. Schools launched awareness programs, teaching students the devastating consequences of carrying a blade. Community leaders pushed for better youth support services. But was it enough? Or was it too late? Knife crime in London isn't new. It's been rising for years. In 2023 alone, over 12,000 knife-related offenses were recorded in the UK. More than 100 teenagers have been killed in stabbings over the past 5 years. Each one a life lost. Each one a family shattered. Experts point to a toxic mix of poverty, gang culture, and social media glorification. Some blame the government. Years of cuts to youth services, fewer mentors, fewer safe spaces for at-risk teens. Others say the issue is deeper. Broken homes, cycles of violence passed down through generations. But one thing is certain, whatever the reason, the cost is being paid in blood. Could Eliane's death have been prevented? Could someone have stopped Hassan before it was too late? It's the question that haunts this case. And the answer, it's complicated. Hassan had been flagged for behavioral issues before, but the system is stretched thin. Schools, overworked and underfunded, can only do so much. Police can arrest offenders, but they can't stop the next one from picking up a blade. And so the cycle continues. Now it's too late for Eliane, too late for Hassan. But is it too late for the next generation? Eliane Andam was 15 years old. She wanted to be a lawyer. She had a future stolen in seconds. Her story should have ended with graduation, with dreams fulfilled, with a life well lived. Instead, it ends here, with a question. Will we finally listen, or will we wait for the next tragedy? Eliane Andam's story should have been one of triumph. She should have walked across a stage in her graduation gown. She should have fought her first case in court, defending the innocent, speaking for those who had no voice. She should have had the chance to grow up, to love, to live. But instead, her story became a statistic, another name on a growing list of young lives cut short by a blade. If you're watching this, you might be thinking, this is tragic, but it's far away. It doesn't affect me. But here's the truth. Violence like this can touch anyone. It could be your friend, your sibling, your classmate, or it could be you. And that's the cruelest part of stories like this. They don't feel real until they happen to someone you love. Eliane's mother once said, she was meant for great things, and she was. But now her greatness must live on in all of us, in the way we choose to speak up, in the way we demand change, in the way we refuse to let her name fade away. Because if we forget her, if we move on without learning, then we are just waiting for the next Eliane, the next tragedy, the next name. And this is where you come in, because this can't just be another video you watch and forget. This has to be a conversation, a movement. So tell me, what do you think needs to change? Have you or someone you know been affected by youth violence? Drop a comment below. Let's talk about this. And if you believe Eliane's story deserves to be heard, share this video. Send it to a friend, a parent, a teacher. Let this be more than just content. Let it be a wake-up call. This channel is dedicated to telling the stories that matter, the stories that need to be heard. If you want to see more in-depth true crime documentaries, if you want to make sure voices like Eliane's aren't lost, hit that subscribe button. Because justice doesn't end with a sentence. It ends with change. And that change starts with us.